Nomiki show. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back.
I'd make sure to check the chat.
Free from elites, oligarchs stay fed, deep state, fake fed. Everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show. The Nomiki show.
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. It is Wednesday, June 23rd, also known as the day after the New York City municipal elections, as well as New York State. There were some elections, but we will talk about that a little later in the show. There are a lot of updates and there's a lot of non-updates. But what we do know, while this was all going on, very busy news day yesterday, our country's civil rights were under attack. Let's roll this clip from the Senate floor.
setting basic national standards to make sure that all voters in this country can vote legally in the way that works for them, regardless of what zip code they live in, regardless of if they live in a big city or in a suburb or out in a small town in western Minnesota.
The federal takeover elections shouldn't happen. I urge my colleagues not to support it happening. The American people don't want to see the things imposed on our election system that are in this bill, and I urge my colleagues to vote against this harmful legislation.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn not having voted in the affirmative. The motion is not agreed to.
So, we are dealing with quite a crisis right now in this country, because not only have Republicans taken on civil rights and voting, just what existing voting laws we have over the last several years, but these voting laws would have expanded the rights of so many people in multiple states in terms of elections. Why does this matter? Well, in New York, we actually had a bunch of votes. These voting reforms changed the election yesterday, for good and bad in some ways. But let me just go over what happened. We had a Senate yesterday. The Senate, of course, remember, needed to have 60 votes to overcome the Republican filibuster. And of course, the Senate was unable to move on the For the People Act to the floor for a debate, just for a debate. In a vote of 50-50, they fell short. All of the Democratic senators voted to begin debate, just a debate, while the Republicans unanimously voted to block it. The For the People Act is largely hailed by Democrats as being necessary because Republican-led states have taken to war at the state level on voter restrictions. So they're moving us backwards, creating restrictive voting laws, over 150 of them across the country, partly because Democrats put no energy and no time whatsoever in winning these state legislatures. So my question to you, President Biden, is what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about this? Is there something that you can sign with your pen? Is there some way you can pressure Joe Manchin or Chuck Schumer to pressure Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to end the filibuster? Because this is the end of democracy that exists in this country as we know it. We should start thinking about what happens post-democracy, because that is how bad it's getting. We have a country that is far more progressive, far more diverse, income inequality worse than it's ever been, and yet Republicans are in command at the local level all the way to the national level. They are using the power of antiquated systems like the filibuster, and they're taking advantage of the Democrats' inability to invest in local parties, to recruit candidates, to fight at the state level. They are taking advantage of every opportunity they can get. And while we have the presidency, President Biden is not fighting. And this is what happens. There's been a call for a civil rights march on Washington. Great. Love marches. Will President Biden, will Joe Manchin hear it? How about a march on Kyrsten Sinema's lawn? How about a march on Joe Manchin's lawn? How about an occupation outside of the White House? Because if you can't take voting seriously in this country, then what is this all about? We have a wonderful show today. We have Maximillian Alvarez here to start the show off. And later, Jordan Zakarin and Natalie Shure are on. We're going to be talking about what happened in New York yesterday, last night, whatever's happening. We don't know. We're still waiting. We probably won't know for a while, but we do have some updates. And there's also a theme that took place last night. So we will be right back right after the break with Maximillian Alvarez. All right, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Maximillian Alvarez is the host of the Working People podcast, and he's also the editor-in-chief at the Real News Network. He has put out an article recently in these times. It was actually in May, but it's an interesting article called How the U.S. Military Reinforces Our Brutal Class System. Thank you so much for joining us. Look at that background. I love it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I was
Like
in the
studio. I know. I'm not allowed in the studio yet because they're still figuring out how to like do microphones, and I don't know what's going on. So I'm in a house. I can't get rid of that light. It's there.
Yeah, we're not fully set up yet, which is why I still have my little desk like mic plugged in. But I figured I'm in the studio, might as well set up shop here.
Oh, it was good. You got good lighting. It's very professional. You should be hosting our show instead. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much. First time we've had you on, but longtime fan, I should say.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks. So this article is, I wouldn't say I'm surprised by it, but I think these are the types of pieces that we need to read to kind of really get the sense, the texture of the textual sense, I guess you could say, of how steeped in the military industrial complex our society is. So let's just start off with what inspired you to write this.
Yeah, well, and I mean, it's I wanted to just kind of clarify, because what I do is I have a partnership within these times in the Real News to republish episodes of my podcast, Working People. And so this article is based on a longer conversation that I had on the show with 3 military veterans who talk about their own respective stories, of getting kind of recruited into the military or joining the military, what it was like, what their reasons for doing so were, what it was like when they were there. And then we kind of really expanded the conversation to address the larger kind of issues that you were mentioning, right? Like we knew going into the discussion that it was important, but it was a really big one where we were trying to kind of understand how the military industrial complex has been kind of retrofitted over decades and even centuries to go hand in hand with the exploitative class system in the United States and beyond. And so for that conversation, I was joined by, as I said, 3 veterans: Amber Mathwig, who is a Navy veteran and an organizer with Veterans Against the War; Triste Ordex, who is a Marine Corps veteran and an organizer with Vets for the People; and then Clark, who goes by an alias, who is a Navy veteran and now is a commercial diver. And so the 3 of us, really had an expansive conversation about their own paths into the military and how class and identity, we're really kind of part of that whole process. And I knew, to answer your question, that this was something that I wanted to cover on the show for a long time. It has come up. I've interviewed workers on this show for a number of years about their lives, stories, their jobs, their dreams, and their struggles. And I've had a number of veterans on the show kind of talking about how the military, appealed to them, or, what sort of economic or cultural or existential kind of meaning it provided for them. And also, how in a lot of ways, the sort of hopes and dreams that they had for living a military life, or the hopes and dreams that they had for gaining some sort of larger sense of purpose, some sort of larger purchase on belonging in the United States through the military, really kind of fell apart because of what the military is and what it does. And so I guess the big takeaway is that I wanted to address these questions, and then we all saw this military ad. It's for the Marine Corps, that is actually called The Battle to Belong. And it's a really, I can talk about it if you want, but it's a really dystopian military recruitment ad that really got us all talking and made us realize that we had to record this episode and talk about what this ad was really saying, how it was appealing to working class and marginalized folks. There's a lot of complex stuff there that you can understand about the military industrial complex if you watch that ad.
Do these ads really work? I mean, we've seen some of these crazy ads. I mean, I mean, is it the ads, or is it the appeal of free, college, all of the benefits that are supposedly supposed to come with the military once you serve?
I think it's a great question. I mean, honestly, I feel like it's both. And I mean, I should state up front that I'm not a veteran, right? But I mean, just from the veterans that I interviewed on this show and the ones that I've talked to and the ones in my family, I would say that my general sense is that it is a combination of both, but they're definitely not mutually exclusive, right? And the guests that I had on this Working People episode, Triste, Amber, and Clark, all spoke to this as well. They did feel that sort of draw. A number of them joined right around 9/11, and they talked about, like just that kind of who they were at that moment and how joining the military really did feel like it would give them not only a sense of purpose, but, like would kind of really amplify their sense of belonging in the United States national project, the fight for freedom, democracy, so on and so forth, right? But also they talk about what you just said, right? Triste had a really powerful story, about her family being undocumented immigrants, and she remembers working in the fields with her parents and knowing that growing up, her main goal was to not be poor, right? And that's something that, really resonated with me because it's a story that I've heard from folks in my family and friends that I grew up with, right? Yeah, of course, the military does promise a sort of pathway to economic stability. It promises a pathway to paying for college, which seems ever more attractive the more you look around and see how many of us are just buried under unforgivable debt that we'll probably be paying off for the rest of our lives. But also, there, as I said, the question of belonging is an important one. Especially if you're talking about non-white and marginalized folks, right? Because, I know that members of my family on the Mexican side, like Triste and her family, right? It is a thing where you feel like if you serve in the military, like you gain a greater purchase on your identity as a worthy American citizen, right? And that does apply to kind of other forms of identity as well, right? It doesn't become a replacement for your identity, but it becomes a way to justify your identity and to validate you as a deserving member of the American, national project. And what we see is that however much the military markets itself that way and makes those sorts of promises with these sorts of recruitment ads, the reality is very much different, right? The reality is that once you're in there, you are ground up into a kind of permanent war machine. Folks face kind of endless harassment and marginalization while they're in the military, even producing kind of horrifying phenomena like the kind of murders at Fort Hood, which we talk about in this episode as well, including murders of brown military recruits, women, sexual harassment of women, and non-binary folks is just rampant, but not exclusively to those. Clark told some really harrowing stories about kind of the sort of harassment that happens on Navy ships in the middle of the ocean. Like you can still be on a Navy ship with like your own fellow Navy recruits, and yet still feel like a foreign agent in a foreign land, and you feel farther away from home than you ever have. So this is all to say is that like the military does market itself in a way that it knows it's going to appeal to people who live in a society that alienates them systematically. And I think that's the big takeaway of this episode, right? Is that when we talk about how the military industrial complex and the forever wars, the imperialist wars that America is constantly engaged in, how that kind of fits lock and key with the exploitative capitalist system that we have, you start to see why it's so kind of terrifying that this Marine Corps ad is pitching itself to disaffected, more millennial recruits who feel like they don't have a place to belong in this world, whether it's because of, the sort of like, dystopian digital world that we're all living in, whether it's because the very notion of kind of community in the United States has been eroded. And we have been given so few options to kind of live in those sorts of communities without paying money for it. but all the different forms of alienation that are systematized in this capitalist system that lead people to feel like they are not enough, that lead people to feel like they are not as American as others. This is how the kind of exploitative class system in our country constantly ensures a stable of disaffected, alienated human beings who see the military as the one potential pathway to gain that sense of belonging and gain that sense of purpose, and especially gain that financial stability that is so elusive in all other realms of society.
Is there any sense that recruitment is down right now? I mean, I feel, especially millennials who did come up post 9/11. We know that there were quite a number of veterans who supported Bernie Sanders because of his stance on war, because of so many other factors too, as well. Income inequality, racial justice. The list of issues, basically recognizing what's going on with this generation. But there is a pushback. I think there is, being a millennial, an older millennial. I think you and I could probably both relate to this, that we've seen our generation flip, I think, quite a bit on how we stand when it comes to dealing with war. I imagine that the U.S. military could potentially be having a difficult time recruiting folks right now, or am I just in my own little bubble?
No, I mean, I think I do want to kind of see how things have panned out, especially after the pandemic. But I think that one point that's definitely worth making, and I think really contextualizes this new marketing strategy from the Marine Corps, right, is that with 9/11, you had a much bigger kind of way to sell military life in nationalistic terms. And I do agree with you that in terms of cultural attitudes and generational attitudes, I think that sort of mystique or that allure rather of, like what it means to be a veteran and kind of what personal existential validation you get by being a veteran is not necessarily what it was, certainly not what it was in the years after 9/11. Coupled with, as you said, the kind of decades-long disaffection of the American public at seeing these forever wars drag on, at seeing them not, bear the results that we were promised that they would, of seeing the kind of pain and horror that we are inflicting on people around the world, and also seeing, like you said, Bernie Sanders and others have really, I think, given people more of a language to discuss this. But the more impoverished people are, the less kind of ability they have to make a comfortable and dignified life for themselves here in the United States, and the less support that they get from the government and from the market, the more skeptical people are of the $1 trillion that we add to military spending every year, right? I mean, I think that you're right that people by and large, I would say in the aggregate, have become more disillusioned and disaffected with the military and its role in kind of propping up the American project, which is why the what we were discussing earlier becomes all the more important. Because you're still going to have people recruiting who don't believe in that sort of national mythology, but who still want to pay for college, right? Or who still want to become a citizen, right? Who still cannot find that type of succor and belonging and support that they need in the kind of capitalist hellscape that America has created. And the less kind of support that we actually provide for people there, the more the military is going to seem like the one potential option to find it, even if you fully do not believe in what the American military does.
I'd be curious to see, like, has there been any sort of research on what is, like, at least recent research on what draws people into the military, like polling? I don't know. I mean, if that even exists out there. But I'd be curious to see what draws people in and what their stance is, by the way, simultaneously on the military as they go in, and then what it's like, going out.
Yeah, so I mean, we did I think link to a number of things in the original episode, and I would definitely encourage people to look. I do know that there is a fair amount of research from, especially in the decade after 9/11, because there were a number of things that folks were looking into. I would point people to a great article recently in the New Republic about how the military is constantly ensuring a kind of steady source of working class people to feed into its forever wars. And there are a number of interesting studies kind of linked to in that, including ones that look at the result of, after No Child Left Behind in 2003, I believe, under George Bush, that enabled kind of military recruiters to be able to come into public high schools and have as big of a presence as anyone else. And so that did kind of change the sort of dynamics. And people have been studying that over the past 15 years to see how much time and how many kind of table setups are at kind of middle class high schools or kind of predominantly white high schools, how much kind of military recruitment efforts are directed at low income and working class communities and communities of color. I believe to this day, the highest percentage of military recruitment efforts take place in the southeast of this country, and largely target kind of Black and brown working class folks. But the research is definitely out there, and I wouldn't want to kind of get anything wrong, but I remember kind of looking through it and seeing that, from the kind of presence of junior ROTC programs in, kind of lower income, predominantly Black and brown schools to, the kind of geographical targeting of certain advertisements and stuff like that. I guess the real takeaway point is that what I have seen from the research is that kind of the larger thesis is borne out that the military knows what it's doing. It knows who to target, and it knows why it's targeting lower income and working class folks, right? I mean, it's for all the reasons that we've already laid out on the table, right? And I guess the thing is that this is sadly not new, right? I mean, I think to this day, even though white recruits still make up the majority of military personnel, I believe it is Native Americans who make up the highest percentage of people within an ethnic group who enlist in the military. And, the military has always kind of, been this sort of vacuum for people who American society does not grant a place of belonging, right? It's also, I think, not to downplay, right, the sense of belonging and togetherness and camaraderie that people get while they're in the military. Of course, that's real for the people who feel it. But as we talk about in this Working People episode, there are tons of people who don't feel that, tons of people who are promised that kind of sense of national belonging, that sense of validation that they can't find in American society. And then those dynamics are actually amplified when they're in the military, because then you get, like I said, like a more targeted harassment. You get a kind of more harried race for position within your whatever sector of the military that you're in. If you are a woman, you are going to face tons of harassment. And then we haven't even gotten to the point of what happens to people once they're out of the military, right? And all the ways that, this American society, and especially the American government that loves to tout it's the valor of its veterans, just really doesn't give a crap about them, like once they're out of the military, once they have been ground up and spat out.
That's a whole other episode for another day. We will have to have you back on. It's such a fascinating conversation. It's shocking that this is not discussed more, even on the left. I think that it's, we, like, as you said, on the left, we love to criticize the military industrial complex and the never ending wars and, the military budget, et cetera. But, I think when we get into the nitty gritty of what happens when you're in it, it gives more context. So I really appreciate you putting in that work and sharing with us. And we'd love to have you back on. Maybe we'll talk about PTSD next time you come on.
I'd say I'd love to, but yes, I would
Yes.
definitely like to have that conversation. Thanks so much for having me on, and love and appreciate all the work that you do.
Same here. Maximillian Alvarez. You can go check out the articles in these times, but there's an episode out. He's the host of the Working People podcast and the editor-in-chief of the Real News Network. Go check it out right now. We will have the link in the information section. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back after this quick little break with our amazing panel to talk about the New York State elections, because it's not just New York City. Lots happened last night and lots did not happen. So we'll be right back. So you guys know I love my CBD. I really love it. I didn't love it before, but Sunset Lake CBD, I learned about Sunset Lake CBD from the one and only Majority Report with Sam Cedar. And then I received some Sunset Lake CBD from the company, which is a very unique company, because what makes them unique, you might ask? Okay, well, they're a farmer-owned company, and they ship craft CBD products directly from their farm in Vermont to your door. They essentially flipped a dairy farm. It was the Ben & Jerry's, like the leftist Ben & Jerry's dairy farm. And they flipped it into being a CBD, a quality craft CBD farm where they grow premium hemp. And when you support them, you are supporting rural, sustainable agriculture, rural economies, and you're creating meaningful employment in that community. Their minimum wage is $15 an hour, and the employees own the majority of their company. And on top of all that, they support independent media like our show, The David Pakman Show, and The Majority Report. I love the products. I use the tincture every night when I go to bed. I haven't for the last few days because I've been out of it, but I have used the salve because I get dry skin and pains. I clipped my finger the other day and I just put it on my finger. It really does help. And on top of all that, there are the gummies. There's the chocolate fudge. There's all sorts of stuff that they offer. Go check them out. They have dog biscuits now that humans can eat too. You guys can just chill out and eat, dog biscuits together. If that's what you're into. Hey, why not? It's bonding. But if you would like to make an order, you can go to sunsetlakecbd.com and type in NOMI, N-O-M-I, and you will get 20% off of your entire order. It's sunsetlakecbd.com. Just type in NOMI, N-O-M-I, and you get 20% off of your entire order. How are we, Brad? Do we have our panel here? Can we bring them in? Let's go to a quick little break while we bring everybody in. Brad, let's go to a quick break. All right, we are back. Thanks for that little for that patience, guys. Jordan Zakarin is a media producer with More Perfect Union. He, of course, founded the Progressives Everywhere newsletter. It's a great place to check out what's happening with progressive campaigns, causes, and candidates. And Natalie Shure is a writer and researcher. She's been featured in The Nation, The Atlantic, BuzzFeed, In These Times, Slate, Jacobin, The New Republic. Let's just keep going and going and going. She actually has a piece out right now in The New Republic called, quote, "Meet the villain of In the Heights, Alexander Hamilton." I am so excited you wrote this piece, by the way, Natalie, because I've been bitching about this for a while. It's like one of my favorite topics. So thanks for putting in the work and doing what many are afraid to do, which is challenge Lin-Manuel Miranda.
I mean, I have to say, I wrote that piece as a huge fan of both musicals. I don't think that there are a ton of musical theater fans on the left, maybe more in the progressive world, but I'm definitely a very emphatic one. I think that they're both great shows. I think if anything, Hamilton is the better piece of musical theater than In the Heights, but I think In the Heights has better politics. So that's what I wrote about.
I love it. Can you give us a little summary? And by the way, our producer, Brad, he's a Broadway guy. So like it does happen on the left.
All right, go Brad, go. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, so in a nutshell, with all the obvious caveats that Alexander Hamilton was alive before most historians recognize as the advent of global capitalism, particularly in an American context. So I don't want to say that, he was the ultimate capitalist because that would be ahistorical, but he certainly sided with the financial elites in a lot of key revolutionary era fights. And was thought of in that way, thought of as sort of, an elitist, anti-democratic figure. As the musical discusses, he had a lot to do with designing the seeds of what became our financial system, some ideas about debt, some ideas about, who should be remunerated and why. And In the Heights is a musical basically about gentrification in the Washington Heights neighborhood, about all of these Latino families who find themselves struggling. And I don't want to say it has perfect politics, but at its very best, I think it's a musical that is about class issues. It's very much centering the material issues of the characters and showing how they're working so hard just to scrape by, how they're getting priced out of their community that they've lived in for so long. And there are definitely hints of the idea that protest is potentially the solution here and the way that they can, band together as a community and stay where they are. So the politics aren't exactly reconcilable in some ways.
Meanwhile, Lin-Manuel Miranda's dad is a consultant up in Washington Heights. And, there's lots of other stuff happening there. Represented the IDC, just for all of you guys. It's a great transition. I'm moving to New York politics. So that was my transition. I was looking for something here.
It's the show that the piece itself was very much about the texts of the shows. I don't know which one is Lin-Manuel's politics, if either. And so, how his dad's connections would play in, I'm not really sure, but maybe.
Well, Hamilton was basically funded by the Obama world. So, there's that side too. Let's transition a bit because last night was crazy. We had and I know, Natalie, you're not in New York, but I imagine that you live on Twitter like the rest of us, since you're fully aware of what happened.
Yeah, I'll New York.
Yeah, it was a wild election. It was just a reminder for folks. It was the first ranked choice voting citywide election, or election in general, for primaries, for the Democratic primaries, for the city, not for state. So that's important because there was another election that happened for the DAs, which is a state race. People may not know that. So there are a lot of people didn't know that. There was a pollster who sent out a poll, didn't know that. Lots of things. We don't have answers to everything yet, but what we do know is that Andrew Yang is no longer in the race. Can we just play the clip and I'll tell you when to stop? Of him conceding.
There's so many people I owe an incredible debt to for the success and impact of this campaign. But you all know I am a numbers guy. I'm someone who traffics in what's happening by the numbers, and I am not going to be the next mayor of New York City based upon the numbers that have come in tonight. I am conceding this race, though we're not sure ultimately who the next mayor is going to be, but whoever that person is I will be very happy to work with them to help improve the lives of the 8.3 million people who live in our great city. And I would urge everyone here to do the same.
All right. So he goes on for several more minutes. Just so everybody knows, the state of the race, like there's potentially many rounds. We're not entirely sure. I mean, listen, everybody could just drop out tomorrow and Eric Adams could be the mayor. That would be interesting. And Paperboy Prince, then we'll see what's with that one. But there's many rounds, and we're expecting, they're not even going to start counting for several more days, some of this. So we're expecting mid-July final results for the mayoral. Jordan, right before the election, Andrew Yang and Catherine Garcia campaigned with each other. Andrew Yang's now out. Does that mean that how does that play out in terms of the ranked choice voting, in your opinion? Could Catherine suddenly move up? How does this work?
Well, Andrew Yang only got 11% in the end. So even if all of his votes went to Garcia, I don't think that's going to be a huge game changer there. I guess it would be. But I can't imagine that every single person paid attention the last weekend. There was plenty of people who were sending, who had decided way ahead of time. I think that ultimately, Andrew Yang, got to give him credit. He got 5% in the Iowa caucus last year. He got 11% here. So maybe one day he'll work his way up to a plurality where he could win an election if he just keeps running every year somewhere different. But I will say that I think that Andrew Yang and the focus that was put on him, because he wasn't a good candidate and said a lot of horrible things, really helped Eric Adams kind of squeak through. I mean, the last few weeks of the election, we saw what kind of like a crazy person Eric Adams is, not to say something non-PC, but I think Andrew Yang accidentally, I don't think it was his intention, but provided the cover that helped Eric Adams pull it out.
Sorry, I was on mute. I apologize. You'd think I would know how to do this at this point. Okay, so Eric Adams is a former cop. He was beaten by the cops when he was a kid with his brother, who still struggles with the effects of being beaten by a police officer when they were kids. And he joined the police force to reform the police force. He's pushing for stop and frisk again. Really interesting kind of dynamics, because I saw a statistic recently saying that crime rates, while it doesn't look like this when you look at the New York Post or the New York Daily News or the New York Times or social media or any of these candidates, crime rates are actually where they were in 2013, which was the best in 50 years. So it has actually just gotten more and more safe in New York. And yes, it's an uptick, but it's by no means an uptick compared to where we were in the 80s and even in the 90s. So Natalie, I mean, is this part of a trend do you think that this is a trend now where you're going to see the centrists take the fear mongering? I mean, this used to be a Republican tactic, but this is centrists now doing this in cahoots with the Republicans. Do you think this is the direction they're going to go in major cities?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd also maybe potentially disagree that it is a traditionally Republican thing. I think that we have seen Democrats, standard-bearing Democrats, doing this for a long time. Whether or not that's been at the municipal level, off the top of my head, I can't totally speak to that. But certainly, politics has trended toward tough on crime tactics within the Democratic Party for a long time. And I think that we're now mercifully swinging away from that. And then it's a little concerning to see a bit of a swing back to the right. What I do think has maybe been left out of these conversations is the degree to which the pandemic itself influences some of these things. We know that it was a very difficult time, a very stressful time for many reasons, and that you see that reflected in certain measures of social disorder. And so I would hope that this is another example of something like that. I think that, people aren't quite taking that into account. So we'll see if it becomes a long-term trend or not.
So, it's interesting though, because simultaneously, this was obviously a strange election. This was a pandemic, always low turnout for these citywide races and these municipal races. Surprise, low turnout. We don't know how many people have fled the city still to this day. We have no sense of who wasn't able to vote because they weren't here or whatever, or the registration deadline, they had nowhere to, switch the registration or mail in or whatever. Ranked choice voting, large field. There was matching funds, for every dollar that somebody raised in the city, they got $8 more. So it leveled the playing field in some ways. Then you had these super PACs come in. So it's just, like a little crazy. All this stuff is going on. While the left has been doing a pretty good job running and organizing at the ground level. So while the mayor's race turned out to be a bust, and, there were some people that were backed by the Working Families Party, for instance, which I think represents the left here, but it's not fully left. The three members who were running to the left all terrorized Bernie supporters a few years ago. So let's just put this in context. Scott Stringer, Dianne Morales didn't even vote for Cynthia Nixon 2 years ago. And of course, Maya Wiley was no fan of the Bernie people at all. So they consolidated this group. It wasn't some, working class hero, union leader, wherever. But there were wins for the left. So you're seeing this juxtaposition now. But I want to focus on, can we just put that Twitter post up real quick of Eric Adams? Because this is my favorite line now that the centrists say. I love it, but they're just, in my opinion, jealous. Eric Adams tonight is from Ben Jacobs. Quote says, social media does not pick a candidate. People on Social Security pick a candidate. Jordan, can both of these things be true in some ways?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the mayoral race and this fluke thing. And, I don't want to say that Eric Adams was not, he seems to have won, did really well in, public places in public housing. He certainly did well with older voters. He did well, in the Bronx, he dominated there, and deep South Brooklyn, he really, and South Queens, he really dominated. And so he's someone who's been around for 20 plus years. He was in the mid 90s. He was doing things in the 80s. He was doing things. So this is a guy that is not, I'd barely heard of Maya Wiley, a couple years ago. Scott Stringer, I don't know, he's the comptroller or something. These are not like you said, no working class
Scott Stringer's been known for a long time.
Sure.
That's, to be fair, next to Eric Adams, the two of them are very, very well known.
But he got, kind of kicked out of the race, more or less. And so this guy, Eric Adams, has been around forever, right? He's been building community support. He's been running charities and, bilking money and maybe stealing a little bit of money on the side and taking $300,000 from real estate developers over the last bunch of months. So
that's New York.
Yeah. So he's been doing things that, are patently corrupt, but he has been out there making a name for himself, saying things. And, he was also for a long time the cop that was making cops angry. He wasn't the Giuliani type. He wasn't the Bernard Kerik type. He was a cop who was making cops angry. And maybe now, he has a different message because he sees the timeliness of it and he can kind of, contrast the left. But he wasn't always, Mr. Tough on crime, maybe more than he would be, versus super progressive candidates. But people don't see him as this military leader. I will also say that when we talk about crime, I think the media really loves to kind of needle the left, especially after, what happened last year with Black Lives Matter and all the marches and whatnot, talking about how just without any data, just saying that hurt Democrats across the board in terms of congressional elections. There's no real data to prove that, but they have been going with that for a long time. And I know Nate Cohn from the New York Times posted a thing from 2019, him saying that, this proves that, social media is not how people get elected. I mean, we look at India Walton, right, who's up in
We'll
Buffalo.
get to that in a second.
Yeah. So again, Tiffany Caban won. A lot of leftist candidates won. So I wouldn't say that necessarily that it was a great night for progressives and that social media does change everything. But I would also say that this election, I don't think proves the power necessarily of, just how people on Social Security work. I wouldn't say this proves the power of just conventional wisdom. I think that a lot of people backed Eric Adams, whether it was unions got really behind him, whether it was media who left him alone, whether it was just, a lot of, controversial community leaders who got behind him, and that really helped him get through.
I mean, the reality is, though, he didn't get all the unions. He actually didn't get SEIU, Maya Wiley did, and the teachers union supported Scott Stringer. And traditionally in New York, those are the two, other than the police unions, those are the two unions that really will mobilize for you. And
1199, though, I went with, didn't it go with Adams?
No, with
Okay.
Maya Wiley.
Gotcha.
So, this is, it's fascinating to see how, I'm really I've had a lot of issues with people saying social media doesn't win elections. Sure, it doesn't, but it helps you raise money. It helps you get your word out. And you can't win an election as a grassroots candidate unless you have small dollar donations. Mm-hmm. And, there's a lot of other factors here at play too. He won Southeast Queens because he consolidated support in Southeast Queens, which is still very machine oriented. He won Brooklyn because he's the Brooklyn borough president. He had more name ID than anybody else. Scott Stringer, I mean, people, there are neighborhoods where people do better because they have relationships there. Some of these endorsements still matter. And in some neighborhoods, like my neighborhood in Astoria, social media does make a difference because our DSA membership is so large there. So Tiffany Caban could push through 50%. I mean, she also, the left also consolidated around her. So it wasn't that she won because of social media. It wasn't because she won because she's left. It's because she had a coalition of people behind her really pushing her candidacy in a low turnout city council race. And so I say this because I actually do think social media can make a big difference in some of these races where there's low turnout. I do think that it gives, and especially like the smaller races like city council, if you do it right, you can actually pull in India Walton, which we'll get to in a second. Natalie, I mean, is this the path forward? Is like getting hyper local and using all of the tools we have to build these coalitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think social media is a really important tool. I think it can't be the only tool in your toolbox. And so if social media is there to, complement a really strong ground game that's bolstered by a strong coalition with deep movement ties in a community, then yeah, it's really important. I don't think you can tweet your way into office or into political change more generally.
Sorry, Paperboy Love Prince.
No, I mean, look at the newsletter that I run. The idea is that I'm not getting people on the ground, to vote for these people, but we're raising money. We're trying to help raise awareness and bringing attention to different candidates that are all across the country. And if we can raise like $5,000, $10,000 for small dollar donors for a local campaign, that can make a difference. They just need to do it. They need to do it right on the ground, in the grassroots. Then it's on them. So it's kind of like a two-part equation.
Yeah, and a lot of these endorsements come in after you've raised as a candidate a certain amount of money so that you show that you're viable. In the city races in particular, it's really powerful because if you're targeting New York voters to give money, you can hit matching funds earlier, and then suddenly you are able to hire more staff and more volunteers and really build a viable campaign. Speaking of viable campaigns, I grew up in Buffalo, and so this one really shocked me because Byron Brown is the mayor of Buffalo. He has been for 4 terms, I believe. And he is the chair of the Democratic Party in New York State, which, for those of you who don't know, is not a party. It is a club for all of Cuomo's friends. And basically, if you're not one of Cuomo's friends, you're not really part of it. I shouldn't say that. They set a lot of the rules of the Democratic Party, but a good chunk of Democratic Party members that are elected in New York State are not part of that coalition, to make it extremely clear. So Mayor Byron Brown was voted out yesterday by India Walton, who is a self-declared socialist. She was endorsed by pretty much all the left leaders. I don't know how much people are paying attention to this, but this is huge because this is now the first mayor who labels themselves as socialist in several decades in the US. So can we just play this clip of her speaking last night?
Yourself a socialist?
Oh, absolutely. The entire intent of this campaign is to draw down power and resources to the ground level and to the hands of the people. And when we think about socialism,
I can't believe this.
We're perfectly fine with socialism for the rich. We will bail out Wall Street and banks and give $1 billion in tax incentives to one of the richest people in the world to build an empty Tesla factory in South Buffalo. And when it comes to providing the resources that working families need to thrive, socialism becomes scary at that point. So I'm very proud to be a Democratic socialist. I am proud to have the support of Buffalo DSA and National DSA. I received a call from Congresswoman AOC this evening, and I'm just excited to be a part of this movement that is ushering progressive politics into Buffalo. Being the 3rd poorest mid-sized city in this country, we should be considering how we begin to eradicate concentrated poverty and disadvantage, and democratic socialist leanings are a big step in getting us there.
Wow. So this is, I don't know how to emphasize how big of a deal this is. This is a town that has been run by a Democratic Party that is so institutionalized, so not forward thinking. And honestly, the DSA chapter was decent sized enough, but it's not Astoria. This is seismic and like a shock. And I think, this is happening on the tailwinds of Andrew Cuomo barely keeping his power, and to see one of his strongholds in New York State go social. Now Buffalo is the city; it's not Western New York proper, but it's a huge deal. It's a huge deal, and I don't know. Natalie, what are your thoughts? Can we do this other places?
Yeah, I mean, to put it in perspective, when Bernie Sanders was the mayor of Burlington, Vermont in the 1980s, its population was less than 40,000, and Buffalo has a population of over 250,000. So we're talking
Western
about
New York does. Western New York does. Wait, no. Western New York does. Western New York does, not Buffalo, the city.
Oh,
sorry.
I looked it up. I thought it was Buffalo itself is of over 250,000.
Erie County. Sorry, I weirdly know these statistics.
Okay.
No, but it's a big deal because because so much of Erie County is beyond Buffalo, and like you do see very concentrated. But you're right. Regardless, it's a big city. It's a city.
A huge difference in scale between a model that we're more used to, and we're also not used to seeing socialists in executive office. So I think that both of those are really exciting. There is a history, I'm sure that some of you have seen, of sewer socialism, a name for municipal socialists in the 20th century who would specifically look at, okay, how do we create a city for working class people? We have a limited amount of redistributive power in the mayoral office. There's only so much you can do with a given position, but that you can deliver certain things for your constituents. You can prioritize things that they need to live and thrive the way that Walton has said that she hopes to do. And so I'm really excited about this. I think it's a big deal. It's very exciting. She, from what I've read over the past couple of days, seems like a very incredible candidate. Someone who, before she started running for mayor, was a union activist and a nurse. Just exactly the type of person that we'd want to have running. Community activist who is politicized by the pandemic, who gets angry enough to run, and who is able to put up a ground game to win. So I can't wait to see what she does. Jordan,
thinking about the dynamics now, like, you have a mayor who's I guess Bill de Blasio was a member of DSA. Let's not forget, years ago he did go to the convention. So, it is what it is. But Buffalo is going to have a mayor that is a socialist and a city council that is still extremely establishment institutionalized, and an Erie County legislature, which works just, to play in all this stuff. The Erie County legislature, which reflects kind of the broader Buffalo and surrounding areas with Buffalo City, that also an county executive that is conservative. Mm-hmm. So like, how does this all play out? This is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly, first of all, it says no one's invincible. I think we see that a lot. Like, the mayor of Buffalo had been so scandal plagued for so long, and had been so corrupt, and so that's part of it. I think that says, like, hopefully it delivers a message that, clean it up, because you're no longer invincible. There is a force that's going to hold you accountable and take it down. Right. I think also, Natalie mentioned sewer socialism, like they had in Milwaukee for a long time. It's about making things work. I mean, I went to school in central New York, just, it's not Buffalo, but I went to Syracuse, and, just things just didn't work there a lot of times. And maybe it's because of the budget or because of corruption or what have you, but it was also, like things just weren't running. And I think that being efficient and getting things not, she may not be able to, create like a citywide healthcare program. She may not be able to, spend a ton of money on this or that, although being part of, getting money from the American Rescue Plan and hopefully infrastructure will help a lot as well. Chuck Schumer, I'm sure, will make it rain on Buffalo whatever happens with infrastructure. But just getting things done and being efficient and not just putting money towards, big corporate giveaways on the waterfront, what they did as they did in Buffalo. I think that makes a big difference. This effort to, and I think that happened with a lot of like post-industrial cities, trying to rebuild by attracting businesses with giant tax giveaways. I think she mentioned the Tesla thing. Elon Musk has been hiring out of town people. I think that like that kind of policy needs to go away, and I think a mayor can hopefully steer things towards working people and towards towards making things work, instead of just having giant giveaways. And a nice statue on the water, a nice ribbon cutting, but no one actually uses it.
No, you're right. I mean, this is just for folks who don't know. Governor Cuomo had this economic development plan that he put forward. This Tesla factory is supposed to be attracted by Elon Musk, and it's an empty Tesla factory. It's been, It's all about jobs, bringing the jobs back to Buffalo. And it has not worked out. And it ended up being a part of a huge corruption scheme that put Andrew Cuomo's circle of trust around him in jail for these, fake to be fair, the waterfront has been redeveloped, but it was not necessarily because of Andrew Cuomo. Those were some other deals that he did. Just want to update you, Natalie, you're right. I screwed up. They lost 200,000. Buffalo lost 200,000, the city, and it's on a 56%. No, that's not right. 0.5. Oh my God, I'm not reading. Now we're reading all of them. Anyways, it's 256,000 in 2019, the city of Buffalo, but had lost 200,000 in a decade. That was the number that
Wow, that's a big number too.
Welcome to the Midwest, guys. Just a fun little fact I want to throw out there because I love this story. So Tom Perez, the former chair of the DNC, was from Buffalo, and we went to like competing high schools. But my favorite story with him was when he was running around as the former labor secretary, telling everybody that Buffalo lost all their jobs because of NAFTA, which is not true at all. And I was like, really? Because I remember when all the factories were dilapidated when I was 8 years old in 1992, and that's when they started losing jobs. And it was actually on the front page of the Buffalo News, like 100,000 people fled the city in 10 years or whatever it was. So it's been a constant source of frustration. Projects that never get finished, a tired, aged establishment political system, and of course, Tom Perez.
And now he's running for governor in Maryland, so you can be excited about that.
Again? He's talking about that? He's still talking about it again? Oh, okay. We'll see what happens.
Excited.
He's been talking. Get excited, guys. Progressive change. I can't wait to play his speeches on loops. Natalie, Jordan, thank you so much for doing this quick little wrap up of New York State politics. And and Brad wants to add that he loved when a bird pooped on Tom Perez. Did not know that.
Right.
That's actually good luck in my culture. So not a great thing.
Your culture.
My culture. All right, guys, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much.
All right, everybody. We're gonna skip our shout outs today and we're gonna throw them in tomorrow. We had a tight show today. Started a little late, but thank you to everybody. We are going to be announcing something tomorrow and Friday, so definitely stay tuned. It's gonna be a little bit of an announcement, a programming announcement. You definitely want to check it out. And to everybody on Twitch and YouTube, thank you so much for your patience over the last few weeks with the power issues, with the streaming issues. We've figured it out finally with YouTube in particular, but really grateful to everybody's support and patience. And we will see you tomorrow, same time, same place on Twitch and YouTube at 3:00 Eastern. In the meantime, stay in solidarity.
The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. Yeah. Clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show.